Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Zaccardi, and I'm going to be reading from my new book, A Wolf Stands Alone in Water. And it's a really dark book. So I tell people you probably shouldn't buy it. But if you insist upon buying it, you shouldn't read it. But if you insist upon reading it, I would say read a few poems at a time. Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. And that's actually what I'll do. I think I'm going to read 4 poems they're all dark. And then I'll read a really short poem that's in the beginning of the book. It's called the funny word a proem, P-R-O-E-M, or proem, which means preface. So it's kind of a preface poem, and it's only 25 words long. So my speech about it was longer than the poem. So let me find my page here. This one is called On the Outskirts. I have 4 poems that deal with the lynching of blacks in America. On the Outskirts, and there's the epigraph. Denmark, South Carolina, 1899. I took the bird's eye view, he told the reporter for the Bangor, Maine newspaper, because partaking in lynching parties is disagreeable business, especially as it was a dog day hot and the mob of men and boys argued over which 2 trees nearby to use, then settled on a sway-backed oak near a ditch near the crossroad of 2 train lines, going which ways through Bamberg County. And then, under the shade, they lugged some railroad ties across this ditch, and the victim was made to stand there while one of the eminent town leaders read from Leviticus, at which time the townspeople quieted a bit, but then some stamped their feet on the red clay soil because they wanted to catch the 12:30 to get back to their farms and homes and such. So a few local reporters showed them how an execution ought to work in the regular way, hanging, then shooting, making this a well-arranged affair. Then when the rope was made ready, they pulled the ties from under this poor sort, and whilst he danced, he was honeycombed with bullets. And some men scrubbed their hands with horehound leaves against the stink of creosote, and boys cheered as the train hustled in sight. And it turned out that the lynchman was innocent of an attempt to outrage a white woman after the guilty man, found in Georgia, confessed. The reason I wrote this poem, I was reading a biography of Carl Sandburg, and he was a reporter for a Chicago newspaper, and he mentioned this particular event, and I was so taken with it that I felt I had to write about it. And this is a difficult poem, and I'll just read it, and you'll see. The End of Love. Daddy says it will not hurt. He says to tell him if he does, and he will stop. He smells so good, the way cinnamon bread smells when it is in the oven baking. I tell him to stop because this does hurt, and he does. He caresses my hair. He kisses me on my forehead. It is as though a feather had touched me and left the scar. He covers me with my dancing bare blanket and sits in the corner on the floor. His head is in his hands. His shoulders tremble. I can hear his deep breaths before I fall asleep. Someday I will kiss him on his forehead. He will not know it is me. He will not know. And the next 2 poems are really take place in Vietnam. I know I look terribly young, but I was really there. At least everyone tells me I look terribly young, but I don't really believe them. This one's titled No Middle Name. His last name was stitched onto his jungle fatigues, followed by his first initial. about 1 inch above the left side shirt pocket, as though he were a little boy who might wander off and become lost. There were popping sounds in the distance, the kind you would hear in a play about gangsters. The clouds that day were a fine art in their whiteness, and from time to time they changed their shape and position. And then there were voices, as though coming from backstage, and laughter, as if someone had just told a joke. They were coming toward us. I wiped some grime off that soldier's cheek with the back of my hand and swept his hair off his forehead. He was so beautiful. That's when I cursed out loud, then heard someone say, "Over there. It came from over there." I forgot to mention that I was a hospital corpsman over in Vietnam. That's like a nurse. And my father always told me, he said, when I went in, he told me, don't volunteer for anything. So immediately I volunteered for a search and rescue team. And here's another one. Infantrymen, no dog tags. I once put my mouth to another man's mouth because he could not breathe on his own. Blood rose from his throat, and I knew there was nothing more to be done. I depressed his tongue with my fingers and turned his head to one side to let what poured from him spread out on the red dirt. I turned onto my back, lying exhausted next to him, and held his hand as his body cooled. The heat from the sun felt good, but not the hunger, not the shame. And as promised, here's my little proem poem. It's really short, so you got to pay attention. A kind of surrender. This morning, the last bloom on the wisteria fell away. Why is it I close my eyes to music and open them when there's a storm? Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.